All right, another episode of the Heat and Light podcast, a little pre-vacation episode of the Heat and Light podcast. I'm headed to Maine this week to do a little hiking and exploring, but before that, we did want to get to a few things, and I'll just jump right in because it's been a big day around here in New York, in the car all day. It was the premiere last night of the 30 for 30 ESPN documentary on Mike Francesa and Chris Russo, who were the hosts of Mike and the Mad Dog here for 20 some years. Just the pioneers of sports talk radio. If whatever town you listening from, or whatever place you live, you owe that their success, their sort of pioneering attitude to whatever screaming man is on your local sports radio. This all descended from this main tree. And it was cool. And I wanted to talk to you, Mark, a little bit about it because we both had sort of different experiences with the show. Both had at least a little time sort of dotted throughout the tri-state area when we were growing up. And I know just from conversations we've had in the past, the Mike and the Mad Dog show had definitely had like a giant impact for you, and is something that you think a lot about to this day.
By the way, vacation for you.
Yes.
My vacation is over, and I am now staring down, as you will be when you return, 6, 7 months of nonstop activity centered around one thing and one thing only, the National Football League. But yes, I think that a huge reason that I fell in love with sports and the NFL in general was Mike and the Mad Dog. I think I'm about 8, 9 years older than you, and I remember the first day that 660 kind of decided we're going to be this. They moved over from another place on the dial. We're going to be the number one sports talk radio station, and really the beginning, the flagship, the start of that entire sort of industry and enterprise. And it was incredible. It makes me think of my brother and my dad. We would drive around the car, just listening to sports talk radio, driving my mom utterly nuts on trips with like 3.5 hours of Mike and the Mad Dog. But also, I just had these weird memories of trying to call them up on the phone just to get on the show and interact with these guys who were larger than life when you were like a 14-year-old kid. And one funny instance I had with them, my friend Peter, the two of us had a friend named John Powers who could have cared less about sports. He was a really fun, smart friend, loved writing, loved books, could not care about football. So we would constantly create these scenarios where we would call up Mike and the Mad Dog. And my friend Peter, one time I remember consistently would name drop my friend John Powers as this mysterious candidate to take over for various offensive coordinator roles during the offseason. And we at one point had him pegged. We were talking to Chris Russo, my friend Peter, saying that this John Powers character who was up in Canada was, he was going through a tough breakup with a woman, but that as soon as he got over that drama, he was going to be lured down to Cleveland to run their offense. And Russo was just like, I never heard of this guy, and so we would sit there and tape it. We'd tape it on a cassette tape player back then, and play these tapes for our friends. Where we would every once in a blue moon get Russo to comment on this John Powers character from up in Canada somewhere.
It's funny because he mentioned today on the radio how hard he was on producers, and if they were ever unprepared for a segment, he would go and scream at them. And I can only imagine this wily, furious Chris Russo coming in and just pounding the table and being like, "Get me everything on John Powers!"
Right.
Who is this John Powers? He's an offensive guru in Canada.
Totally pre-internet, so there was no way for them to refute it on the spot. FAN would be on in our home from the minute I woke up in my room until literally the next morning, because I would listen to it through the entire night. I would have it on and drift in and out of sleep, but I found it to be this constant companion.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the cool thing about the Fan was it was sort of the soundtrack to my truancy in junior and senior year. I lived next to our high school, and one of my buddies who was a huge Yankees fan had sort of just introduced this world to me. And, one day we were just, decided to leave school and walk down to my house. And he said, turn on the Yes Network. And you just see these insane people. Like Chris Russo is this skinny, ill-dressed Italian man screaming, and then Mike Francesa is this amorphous blob of a human drinking Diet Coke and like with this awful hair, and you just listen to them like mumble on and mutter on, and he loved it because I just started dying laughing, and I didn't realize at the time in Pennsylvania that this was the most important thing in people's lives, and I guess my one quick brush with them was. We used to be obsessed with their Super Bowl trivia week leading up to the Super Bowl. Chris Russo would come in dressed as like a 17th century pioneer. Like he would wear like a powdered wig and like a general's coat, and they would ask these impossibly hard trivia questions to callers on the air, and they would just blast you if you got it wrong. They would say all these horrible things about you, and we loved it. And so it was always our goal to be able to get onto the show just one time and try to win. And so he went to one college, I went to another college. He texted me and he's like, "It's on, let's go." And I ended up I was on deck. The producer said, you're next. And I was waiting because all day they had just been kneecapping people with this one question. And it was this obscure soundbite, and they said, "Who is this? Who said this?" And people are just like, "I don't know, Mark Bavaro." Like they had no idea who it was, and it was like a really obscure soundbite from a couple Super Bowls before that by former Seahawks tight end Jeremy Stevens, who is more famous, I guess, now for a lot of other stuff than being a productive NFL player. But I just remember them saying, "Sorry, we're going to break," but they let me listen to the guy in front of me finish it, and the Jeremy Stevens question came up, and I am just alone in my dorm room, like at noon on a Wednesday, just screaming, "Jeremy Stevens, Jeremy Stevens," and just like everyone like that walked by at lunch was like, "What the hell? Is everything all right?" And so I was just like, "Mike, pick up the phone, it's Jeremy Stevens," and so I never got to go on, but because after that, Russo went to Sirius, and they stopped really doing the whole show and everything. But man, I was so close, and it felt amazing. But it was good. I'm excited to see the documentary. I know you are too. I think anyone that likes our show and likes just listening to our show should check it out. Just because even if you don't live in the States, it's a really cool little slice of American life.
Yeah, I know. In this house, in a cost-cutting measure that continually comes back to haunt, we cut cable. So I need to find another way to witness this. I know our good friend Dan Hansis, he watched it last night and said it was phenomenal. And he is a diehard Francesa fan, so he'd be a good reference. And I think for us, there's no real easy way to transition from sports talk radio icons from the tri-state area to our next topic, which is really an odd transition. And we wanted to talk about dreams, the type of dreams, not aspirations, but dreams that you have in the middle of the night. And we've sort of discussed this on and off a little bit because we both had some weird experiences. And I know that that you were mentioning one or two kind of recurring dreams that you would have as a kid that you found to be quite strange.
Yeah, and maybe, to tie it in, I think maybe it does have something to do with WFAN, because if you're anything like me, you had the clock radio on like sort of silently at night as you drifted to sleep, and I'm sure that those strange in and out radio waves somehow contributed to the rolling nightmares that we ended up having as children, if like another host came on and said something goofy. But I ended up getting into it a lot and really trying to look stuff up, and there were some simple answers to a lot of the dreams that I had. Like, for example, I would have this dream about how if I tried to put contact lenses in, but they'd always be like bigger than my face. Or I would have all these dreams where I would like just be making macaroni and cheese, or about to make macaroni and cheese, or buying macaroni and cheese. And I had this book of dream explanations, and both of these were very thoroughly defined in the book. Like the contact dream means this, like, you're about to take on something that you're not sure you're ready for, and the mac and cheese dream means that you're yearning for childhood. But the one dream that I was like the most interesting for me, and it's something that started probably when I was like 11 or 12, and still goes on now, is it was an evolution of that classic dream where you're not prepared for a test, right? And I would have these serial dreams where every every now and then I'd be getting closer and closer to this test that I'm not ready for. Never went to the class, never bought the books. But then that guilt and anxiety sort of rolled over totally 180. And all of a sudden I'm plopped into this dream where I've already committed like 6 or 7 murders, and people are looking for these bodies. And, I'm not dreaming about the killing. I'm not like, some person that's fascinated with that end of the business. I'm more trapped in my own anxiety, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy hell, I got to leave this restaurant because at some point someone's going to find these people that I'm digging up. And so I would like try to roll around to all these burial sites, but instead of driving, I would pick up my car and carry it with me, sort of like a kayak. And I feel like I've succeeded in a way because I've never found anything about that in the dream book. So I feel like I've safely either just totally bewildered these people, or have just maybe the combination of sleep inducing things like melatonin and wine and red meat just creates this explosion in my brain. I don't know.
I think you have like the similar dream life to like a Lee Harvey Oswald of sorts. I can't quite piece together what's happening here. I I know that like from really early on, I remember having these bizarre recurring dreams. I was born in the States, but my dad got transferred over to England, and we lived in London, like outside of London, this little tiny town called Surrey. Well, it's a little neighborhood inside of Surrey, which is a larger town. But I remember living in this little house, and I had a little room up on the second floor. And every night, after as a little kid would do, the lights are off and you're meant to be asleep. I would be moving around the room and not wanting to go to bed, and I'd sit on this ledge of a window and look out at the whole little neighborhood, and then finally fall asleep. But very soon after, and I would say this happened to me over and over, this type of bizarre dream, where I would wake inside the dream in the room. So I wouldn't be awake, but I would think I was. And then I would have this repeated experience of like floating through the door of my room and down a spiral staircase into our little living room downstairs. And I could see things, arranged just as they were before I had gone to bed. And then suddenly I'd get like pulled backward up the stairs in the reverse order, back into my bed, and like the dream would end. And I got really into reading about these kinds of experiences when I got older, and it led me down this total wormhole. Have you ever heard of like astral projection?
It sounds to me, if I'm getting this right, that it's almost like it's like a living, like Buddhist purgatory, sort of. You're like you're out there, out of your body, correct, but not totally. I mean, you're still like a part of yourself a little bit.
Yeah, it's basically described as like your double, that you're not in your physical body, but you're not like detached from it. Like a sort of spirit version of you rises up during dreams, typically at night when you're not, certainly when you're sort of in your subconscious. And I had a much later experience. I was working at this summer camp during the winter months when they would have like a nature's classroom, and so you'd only work like one or 2 days a week, but you'd be alone with these small group of like maybe 15 to 20, like 20 somethings that I knew. We all worked there, and so you'd have hours of vast time to do whatever you wanted. And I started reading like these deep texts about astral projection, and they kept talking about practice it, envision it. And so I don't know if I just created this in my mind, but I had this one other experience where in the middle of winter, early in the morning, I felt myself in the dream rise out of my body, and I could look down and see myself sleeping and everything, just as they would describe it. And so again, I'm wondering if I almost imagined this or if it was real, but I had this incredibly odd thing happen where I went out the hallway of this dorm room I was in, down the hallway very quickly, and then shot into the room where I had two friends who were roommates. And I was suddenly staring down at them. They were both conked out. It was like 5 a.m, and the room was total chaos. Like I saw books and records scattered everywhere. And then just like with the England thing, I got yanked back, almost like a cord, yanked back into my body, and then later woke up. And it was very vivid, this memory of this dream, just like you can kind of only remember parts sometimes. I could remember almost the whole thing. And I went down the hallway, and it was much later in the morning now, walked into these guys' room and said, guys, you're not going to believe like what just happened to me. And just as I had seen, like their bookshelf had been tipped over and books and records were all over the floor. And so I thought, oh my, how on earth what happened here? And I explained to them, because one of them is the one that I've been reading these books with. And to this day, I cannot quite explain what happened, but it was a bizarre experience.
I like the idea of like Marc Sessler, the friendliest ghost, where you're trying to go on these like well-meaning jaunts in your like in this like astral projection life, but you're just like a little clumsy. You're still new to it, So you're figuring it out, but you're still knocking over bookshelves, and you're still accidentally flicking off lights, and so it makes it like a little bit like a slapstick comedy. But I'm also very jealous because this is something that you're mentally at that point where you can do, where like I'm over here like Richard Gere in Unforgivable, just moping around about a murder I committed, and just feeling bad for myself. And you're sort of like soaring through like the half-life, the in-between. Like that's incredible. You're having all these experiences, and then I'm just like, well, I really wish I didn't murder those people.
The stakes feel a little hurt them. You murdered them, by the way, in this dream. So the stakes are a little higher for you. It seems like, yeah, you have the classic thing where it's like in a dream, you don't really get the chance to make choices. You don't have it's not in your mind. Do I want to, attack and murder someone? Suddenly you wake up and you have murdered 6 people, and it's like you have to deal with it. It's like, how did I get? And then it just creates total anxiety. I remember another very bizarre experience. I was living in Boulder in this farmhouse, which I think I mentioned on the show before, and it's the same house where I had mentioned on an earlier show that there was a friend of mine, this girl, that we were living there waiting for these other friends to show up, and she had flipped the light switch off before going to bed one night and began to walk up the stairs to the second floor, and all the lights on the first floor went back on. This is her telling of it, and that she went back down and the switch had physically moved. And it freaked us out, and we went down and did research about this old farmhouse, and it had been like a Colorado dairy farm back in the early 1900s, and there had been a death there, a death of a child. And so when we read that, we thought, our house is so messed up. Like we had been feeling really weird, like just a weird feeling about it from the minute we got there. And when all these other friends from the East Coast arrived and we were all living there together, a lot of it went away. But one thing that continued for me, I had these horrible, scary dreams where they wouldn't always be the same, but it was almost like a lucid dream where, again, I would wake up, I'd be in the room I was sleeping in, the second story room, and I would be like, oh, it's the middle of the night, like, why am I awake? And I would get up and walk around the room, and I'd open my closet, and it would be like 30 feet deep with like a snake at the end of it. So it was like, okay, wait, no, I'm realizing that I'm in a dream, but it's like, maybe it's real. I couldn't quite make it out. And one thing that continually happened was there's this back window that overlooked this horse pasture, and it had some very strange trees. And this was in real life. At night, it was an odd sight to look out in the backyard. And I, in the dream, would walk over and look out the window, and on one instance saw these super like dark matter, like dark energy, like figures out on the lawn. Like they were really tall and they were moving around in circles, and I was struck with total fear. And the other version of this dream is that sometimes I would occasionally look out the window and see these band of like small children, but dressed in clothing from like the 1800s, dancing around in circles, singing these really odd songs. And then I would be convinced it was real, and I'd go look at like my clock radio, and it would say the time was like 33:06. So you're like, okay, wait, I'm definitely still in a dream. And but again, like the feeling that I would get was total, absolute dark horror.
I I I almost talking about this with you kind of makes me mad because, like, for example, you're never going to be able to solve whatever problem was going on there or understand whatever was going on there. It's not like we don't get to be Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams and ease someone's cosmic pain and wrap around and turn off all these lights and go to bed in a neat way. Like, you're always going to have these dancing children in the back of deep recess of your mind somewhere. I had this other dream where, my dad would keep bringing laundry downstairs at our old house, and he would come up and be a slightly different version of my dad. Like when he would come back and he would make all these like ape sounds, and I'm wondering, like, what did you do with my dad when you were down there, and why are you, and like, that keeps happening. And then you hear all these other amazing stories about dreams. Like, I remember watching a Beatles documentary once, or a Paul McCartney documentary, and he's just like, yeah, I just woke up and wrote "Hey Jude" because I heard it in my dreams, and like, so he hears like one of the greatest songs of all time in his dreams. You're getting chased by deep snake pitted, 18th century horror children, and I'm dealing with murders and like possibly the ghostly possession of my still very much alive dad, and all of a sudden these other people are doing these amazing things. I think that's what is cool about it, but also very frustrating. I envy people that have a very smooth subconscious that sort of lends itself to that sort
I
of thing.
think you're underselling yourself. You are dreaming of putting on contact lenses that are larger than like a plate. You're dreaming of like eating mac and cheese as an adult. Your dad is shape shifting. You've murdered multiple people. I think you have a pretty active dream life. I would say it's intriguing.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna lay off the trans fats before bed and see
That
if
might
that
be the
does
key.
anything.
Well, don't lay off them on this vacation because you're about to head out, and we're probably not going to do a show for another week plus. But we do have, when you get back from Maine, we have a pair of what I would consider to be the two episodes coming up that I'm most excited about. And one of them will be historically accurate with something very big in our country that happened in August many years ago. And the other is just flat out weirdness. And I think we'll wait to announce what those will be.
Yeah, as Mike Francesa might say, it's going to be huge, and everyone should tune in. If I decide to come back from vacation, I'm very much looking forward to working on it with you.
All right, well, have a safe trip. And, by the way, what if you don't come back? What happens to the show? I want to think, but, we want to thank everyone that's listened to this. And you can follow us on Twitter now at Heat and Light Pod. So please follow us there as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you again for listening. And if I don't come back, I will haunt Mark forever, and he will still be I'll be the puppeteer for this show through him in some sort of deep mental way. So don't worry, there will always be heat and light.
I like that. That's a fair trade-off if you do somehow perish. I hope that's not the case, but we will see you soon, and everyone else as well. Farewell.